The lobby was quiet until her voice cut through it like glass breaking. "This ID is fake. Get out. People like you don't belong here." The bank manager's words weren't whispered. They were thrown like stones across the marble floor. She held up the worn leather wallet, pulled the card free, and with a flick of her manicured fingers, let it fall. Plastic hit tile with a snap that echoed louder than it should have. The old man bent slowly, knees trembling, back hunched. His hand reached for the card as if it weighed more than gold. His face, lined with decades of work and weather, flinched not at the insult, but at the laughter that followed. Behind the counter, the manager leaned back in her chair, lips curled. "See what I do with your papers. Ha ha." She didn't just laugh, she performed it, loud enough for everyone waiting in line to hear. A few employees shifted uneasily but said nothing. Arms crossed, eyes down, silence became complicity. On the tiled floor, a father stooped. Above him, privilege pointed and mocked. And just 3 feet away, his son sat still. Dark jacket, plain shirt, no logos, no shine. To the room, he looked like just another man waiting. To the manager, he was invisible. But he saw everything: the way her finger jabbed like a spear, the way she enjoyed his father's humiliation, the way the crowd decided to stay quiet. Not one of them knew who he was. Not yet. A teenager near the back raised her phone, red light blinking. A junior teller bit her lip, torn between policy and conscience. The air tightened, heavy with the smell of coffee cooling too long in paper cups and the weight of words no one should have spoken. The father's hand brushed the card at last, curling around it. But before he could rise, a man in a suit near the counter scoffed, "This isn't a shelter. Move him out before he embarrasses the rest of us." The manager smirked wider. "Security will love this." The son didn't move. Not yet. He placed his palm lightly on his father's shoulder, steadying him. His silence wasn't weakness, it was a fuse. And everyone in that room had just lit it. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change. And we're glad you're here. Now, back to the man in the chair. He exhaled once, slow, controlled. 20 years of restraint lived in that breath. Because today wasn't just a visit, it was a test. A test. The bank was failing publicly, loudly, irreversibly. The father rose, card clutched tight, humiliation clinging like dust. The manager rolled her eyes and muttered for all to hear, "Trash doesn't belong on my desk." The son finally lifted his gaze, and though he said nothing, the silence shifted. The lobby didn't know it yet, but the floor they stood on was about to crack open. To anyone watching, it looked like an ordinary Wednesday morning. But nothing about the man in the chair was ordinary. He didn't look like a CEO, not in the way people expected. No navy suit, no polished shoes, no silk tie gleaming under fluorescent lights. Just a plain black jacket, a white shirt, and quiet eyes that gave nothing away. That was the point. Because today wasn't a business meeting. It was a test. He had walked into the bank with his father, an old man in work-worn clothes, carrying the same dignity he had carried through decades of labor and silence. No entourage, no private banker leading the way. Just a son and his father, sitting shoulder to shoulder in a lobby that wasn't designed to welcome them. This wasn't the first time. He'd seen it all before. At 22, trying to cash his first real estate commission, security was called before the check cleared. At 26, applying for a line of credit, a loan officer smirked at his collateral and stamped high risk in red ink across his file. He had carried those memories like scars, silent, heavy, unforgotten. Now, nearly 2 decades later, billions under his name, the same story was playing out. Different voices, same tone. His father's hand trembled as he slid the fallen ID back into its case. The weight wasn't in the plastic card, but in the insult layered over it like dust that clung to skin no matter how hard you brushed. Across the counter, the bank manager adjusted her blazer, smiling like she'd won a private war. She didn't even glance at the man in the chair. To her, he was background noise. Another silent witness, another nobody. But silence can hold more power than shouting. The son leaned back slightly, his hand steady on the armrest. His jaw didn't move, but his eyes fixed on every detail, the smirk, the folded arms of her colleagues, the way no one stepped in. His stillness wasn't surrender. It was strategy. Because what no one in that room understood was simple. He wasn't there to open an account. He wasn't there to withdraw cash. He wasn't there for service. He was there because the bank itself was on trial. A $5 billion partnership had been hanging in the balance. Contracts drafted, lawyers briefed, press releases waiting in inboxes. The deal could make headlines, reshape markets, and cement reputations. But in that moment, every signature, every dollar, every plan teetered on the edge of a single truth. Respect isn't negotiable. The old man looked at his son as if to ask silently, "Should we leave?" But the son didn't move. His father had carried him through years when doors were slammed shut. Today, it was his turn to keep the door open and hold it wide long enough for the truth to walk in. No one in that lobby knew who he was. Not yet. And that ignorance, that arrogance, was about to cost them everything. The insult should have ended there. But arrogance rarely stops once it starts. A teller at the far desk muttered just loud enough, "Seen this scam before. Flash a fake ID. Act like you belong. Classic." Another clerk stifled a laugh. Their voices weren't directed at the father, but the room heard them. And that was the point. The bank manager leaned forward, elbows planted on the polished wood as though it were her throne. "Stop wasting our time," she said, every syllable laced with authority she didn't truly own. "This isn't a shelter. This isn't charity. Take your card and go." The old man froze, half standing, the ID clutched in his hand like fragile glass. He opened his mouth, but no sound came. Humiliation had stolen his breath. From across the lobby, a man in a gray suit, another customer, expensive watch flashing as he checked his phone, chimed in casually, "Don't clog up the line, sweetheart. People here have real business." His smirk carried more venom than the words themselves. The air shifted. Whispers rippled through the waiting area. A mother pulled her child closer. Two college students exchanged looks, one shaking his head but saying nothing. Silence multiplied, thick as smoke. The junior employee in the corner, barely 24, still wearing the nervousness of a first job, shifted uncomfortably. Her lips parted as if to speak, but the manager shot her a glance, sharp enough to slice the courage out of her. She sank back, eyes down. And then, the final cut. The manager picked up a landline phone, spinning it toward herself with a dramatic twist. "Security?" Her voice carried across the lobby like a siren. "We've got a trespasser pretending to be a client." The old man's shoulders slumped. He wasn't a trespasser. He was a father, a citizen, a man who had worked his whole life so his son could build something greater. Yet in this room, in this moment, all of that was erased with one word: trespasser. The son's hand tightened slightly on the chair's armrest. His eyes flickered to the phone, to the manager, then back to his father. Still, he didn't rise. Not yet. His calmness felt unnatural to those watching, but it wasn't apathy, it was calculation. The teenager filming from the back whispered into her phone, "They're calling security. For him." He didn't do anything. The red recording light blinked brighter in the reflection of the glass partition. At the counter, the manager leaned closer, her voice dripping with disdain. "Take your little ID and leave before you embarrass yourself further. We don't process frauds here." Fraud. The word landed heavier than the card that had hit the floor. The father looked down, shame burning through his chest, though he had nothing to be ashamed of. The son finally placed his hand on his father's shoulder again, not to calm him, but to anchor him. And in that silent gesture, the room shifted again. Not that anyone noticed. Not yet. Silence can be louder than shouting. As the manager slammed the receiver back into its cradle, waiting for security, the room braced for protest, for anger, for raised voices, but none came. Instead, the man in the chair stayed seated, calm, still, a hand resting gently on his father's shoulder, grounding him as much as grounding himself. His breathing was steady, measured, almost unnatural in a space filled with ridicule and judgment. The father turned, his eyes searching his son's face. He expected fury, maybe outrage. What he found instead was something steadier, restraint wrapped in steel, the kind of calm that didn't bend, it sharpened. The bank manager mistook it for weakness. "Of course you're quiet," she sneered. "You don't have anything to say because you don't belong here." Her words floated over the lobby, heavy and poisonous. They didn't shatter the son. They carved him sharper. A murmur stirred near the back. The teenager, still recording, whispered, "Why isn't he saying anything?" Her friend answered quietly, "Maybe he's scared." But he wasn't scared. He was waiting. Waiting for every insult to finish echoing. waiting for every witness to see exactly how far prejudice would go when it thought no one powerful was watching. The junior teller shifted again, her hands fidgeting at her sides. She'd seen clients angry before shouting, demanding, waving their checkbooks like weapons. But this? A man sitting perfectly still, gaze unwavering, silence stretched like wire that unnerved her more than yelling ever could. The father lowered his head, shame flooding his features. He whispered softly, just for his son, "Maybe we should go." The son shook his head once. No words, just the weight of quiet conviction. And then he looked up, not at his father, not at the ID still clutched in weathered hands, but at the manager. His eyes locked onto hers, steady and unblinking. He didn't move, didn't speak, yet somehow the atmosphere shifted. It was the kind of silence that didn't surrender, it commanded. A man in the waiting area coughed awkwardly, sensing the change without knowing why. The gray-suited customer who had mocked earlier shifted in his chair, suddenly less comfortable. Even the manager herself faltered for a split second, her smirk wobbling before returning. The son leaned back slightly, posture relaxed, as if the insults had bounced off an armor no one could see. But inside, every word was catalogued, every glance memorized, every action recorded in the courtroom of his mind. This wasn't silence for survival, this was silence for evidence. And though no one in that room knew it yet, the verdict was already writing itself. The first phone rose like a quiet rebellion. From the corner of the lobby, the teenager's hand steadied, red light blinking as her camera captured every second. She didn't zoom, didn't speak, just held her phone firm, as if recording was the only way to push back against the weight of silence. 2 seats away, an older woman in a floral scarf leaned toward her husband. "Are you seeing this?" she whispered. He nodded grimly but kept his eyes down, unwilling to draw attention. Complicity, quiet and practiced. But not everyone stayed quiet. At the concierge desk, a young teller barely older than the teenager cleared her throat. "Manager, maybe we should at least verify the system before—" The manager's glare cut her off instantly. "Do your job, don't interfere." The teller's lips pressed tight, her jaw tense. Her hands fumbled with papers she wasn't reading. She had seen discrimination whispered before, small, hidden, subtle, but never this loud, never this shameless. And now, with witnesses watching, she felt complicit just by standing still. The camera caught her hesitation, the flicker of guilt crossing her face. Another customer, a father balancing a toddler on his knee, shifted uncomfortably. The child tugged at his sleeve, asking for juice. He handed over a bottle with one hand while whispering to his wife with the other. "They're treating him like a criminal." She hushed him quickly. "Don't get involved." But the lobby was already involved. Every insult had spilled past private shame into public theater. People who had once looked away were now watching. Phones tilted, conversations hushed. The atmosphere thickened, no longer routine, no longer safe. The manager thrived on it. Her voice rang louder, theatrically loud. "Security will handle this. Fraud has no place in our institution." Fraud. Again, that word. Heavy, infectious. The teenager's recording caught everything, the father clutching his ID like it was his last defense, the son silent and steady, the manager drunk on her own authority. And in the back corner, a man in a gray hoodie muttered, "This is going online." He wasn't bluffing. He had already tapped live on his feed. The comment counter ticked upward as strangers began to witness the injustice in real time. The son still hadn't moved. But now, the silence around him wasn't just his, it was theirs. Witnesses who couldn't undo what they saw, phones that wouldn't forget what they captured. The teller in the corner swallowed hard. Her conscience wrestled against fear. She knew the man's name had flashed in the system earlier that morning, Carter. She remembered typing it, seeing the reservation flag that marked executive clearance. Her chest tightened. She hadn't spoken then. But now, as the camera lights blinked and the lobby's tension pressed in like a storm about to break, she realized silence would make her guilty too. The lobby wasn't just tense now. It was hostile. The manager straightened her blazer, as if tightening her grip on the room. Her voice sliced through the murmur of witnesses. "Enough. We're done here." She jabbed a finger toward the old man. "Take your fake ID and walk out before this escalates further." Her words rang loud enough for everyone to hear, including the teenager's camera, still blinking red. The father's shoulders sagged, his fingers trembling around the ID. He didn't answer. Couldn't. Years of work, of survival, of teaching his son that dignity mattered reduced in seconds to a label he didn't deserve. Fraud. But the son stayed silent, his hand steady on the chair. That silence irritated her more than defiance ever could. She leaned over the desk, eyes sharp, voice colder. You're not verified. You're not a client. And this isn't a walk-in shelter. If you don't leave, you will be removed. Removed. Like he was trash, not a man. The gray-suited customer smirked again, adding fuel. You're wasting everyone's time. Security should have been here already. He checked his watch, loud enough for the gesture to speak. His time mattered, theirs didn't. Whispers rippled again. A mother gasped softly. The teller in the corner squeezed her pen so tight it cracked. The manager turned to her team. Call the police. Report attempted fraud. Her assistant blinked. Are you sure? Yes, the manager snapped. Now. The word fraud echoed again, now weaponized by authority. The father tried to speak, his voice breaking. My name, my ID. The manager cut him off. Your name means nothing here. That line hit harder than the card on the floor. The witnesses heard it, their eyes wide, their phones steady. Even those who hadn't cared moments before felt the weight of it. The junior teller's chest rose, shallow breaths betraying the conflict inside her. She knew this was wrong. She had seen the name Carter flagged in the system this morning. But the glare of her boss pinned her down. If she spoke now, she risked her job. If she stayed silent, she'd lose more than that, her conscience. The son's jaw tightened, barely visible. Still, he didn't rise. Not yet. Because this was no longer just about his father. It was about exposing exactly how deep the rot ran. How quickly the mask of professionalism cracked into cruelty when it thought no one important was watching. The manager folded her arms, satisfied with the power she thought she held. Security will make this quick. She didn't know that every word was already building her downfall. The word security hadn't even faded before the cruelty went further. One of the clerks, emboldened by the manager's orders, bent down and nudged the fallen ID with the tip of his shoe. The plastic card skidded across the marble like trash swept off a table. Trash doesn't belong here, he muttered, just loud enough for the lobby to hear. Gasps broke the air. A woman near the door clutched her purse tighter. The teenager's camera caught everything, the card sliding, the smirk on the clerk's face, the humiliation etched into the old man's posture. The father bent again, knees straining, to retrieve what should never have touched the floor a second time. His hand trembled, not from age, but from shame forced on him. His fingers brushed the plastic, hesitated, then closed around it like it might dissolve if he let go. The gray-suited customer chuckled darkly. Security should escort him out by now. This is pathetic. The manager's lips curved into a cruel smile. She picked up the landline again, voice rising deliberately for every witness to hear. This is a trespasser, possibly violent. Send security immediately. Violent. The word hit like a slap across the lobby. Everyone had seen the old man silent, fragile, clutching his ID like a lifeline. Yet here, in the mouth of authority, he was recast as a threat. The father flinched, lowering his eyes. He wasn't violent. He had never been violent. But no denial mattered not when her words carried the weight of a system willing to believe her over him. The junior teller finally whispered under her breath, "This isn't right." Her knuckles whitened around the counter's edge. She had logged his name this morning, seen the executive clearance tag. She knew the truth, but fear pinned her still. The lobby grew restless. Phones tilted higher. Whispers became murmurs. Someone muttered, "That's not how you treat people." Another added, "She's lying." But no one stood between the manager and her target. Not yet. The father rose slowly, Idaho clenched in his hand. His chest heaved with a breath that shook more than it steadied. He turned to his son, eyes wet but voice quiet. "We should go." And still the son didn't move. He sat anchored to the chair, watching the storm close in. His silence had stretched as far as it could. Every insult had been documented by witnesses, by phones, by conscience. And now, with one word violent, the line had been crossed. The manager leaned forward, smirk sharp enough to cut. "Security's on their way. You're done here." What she didn't know, what no one knew, was that she had just written her own ending. The chair creaked softly as the son finally moved. Not to stand, not to shout. Just enough to reach into his jacket and draw out a phone, black, slim, deliberate. The small act carried more weight than any raised voice could. He tapped once, held it to his ear. His tone was calm, steady, almost unnervingly quiet. Activate protocol. The room stilled. The manager squinted, her smirk twitching. What are you doing? Calling a friend? Call whoever you want. Security will handle this. He didn't answer her. His voice stayed level, measured. Bring up the acquisition file, full audit, effective immediately. On the other end of the line, a woman's voice replied without hesitation. Crisp, efficient. Yes, sir. Pulling documents now. Every incident is being logged in real time. The father turned, confused, searching his son's face. The witnesses leaned in, phones recording, whispering questions they couldn't quite form. The son didn't look at them. He looked straight at the manager. His silence had been patience. Now it was preparation. You've made several claims, he said, voice clear but never raised. Fraud, trespass, violent. He paused, letting each word hang like weights in the air. Every one of them false. Every one of them recorded. The manager scoffed. You think your little phone call changes anything? You're nothing here. The junior teller flinched at the words. She knew better. She knew his name, but fear glued her to her spot. The son leaned forward slightly, still seated, voice calm but sharper now. What you don't understand is that this isn't about a card on the floor. It's about accountability. And accountability doesn't wait for security. The father gripped the ID tighter, bewildered. He whispered, Son, maybe we should... No, the son said softly, steadying him with a hand on his arm. Not this time. From the back of the lobby, the teenager whispered into her phone's mic. Something's happening. He's not scared. He's different. The manager rolled her eyes, tossing her hand dismissively. Empty threats. You'll both be out the door in minutes. But her words no longer filled the room the way they had before. The atmosphere had shifted. Phones were recording. Witnesses were restless. The balance of power had begun to tilt. And for the first time, the manager felt the ground beneath her heels start to give. The son lowered the phone slowly, placing it on the table beside him. His gaze didn't waver. His silence was no longer passive. It was the silence before thunder. And thunder was coming. The lobby doors swung open. 2 security guards stepped in, belts heavy with radios and keys, the sound of their boots striking the marble sharp enough to silence the murmurs. The bank manager straightened in triumph, gesturing toward the father with a flourish. There, remove him, both of them. They're trespassing, attempting fraud, and now, she smirked, they're obstructing bank operations. The father froze, his hand clenched tighter around the ID. His chest rose and fell with shallow, uneven breaths. But his son did not move. He sat, calm, composed, as the guards approached. And then, with a quiet authority that cut through the manager's theatrics, he spoke. You've just made a very costly mistake. The guards hesitated, one glancing uncertainly at the cameras raised across the room. The teenager whispered, Oh my God, he's about to do something. The son rose slowly, every motion deliberate. No rush, no panic, only gravity, as though the floor itself shifted beneath his steps. He stood eye to eye with the manager, and for the first time, she faltered. He reached into his jacket again, not for the phone this time, but for a slim folder, black, embossed with silver lettering. He opened it, laying a single document flat on the counter between them. His voice carried, calm and devastating. My name is Carter, principal stakeholder in this institution. 40% ownership. And the $5 billion merger you were preparing to announce this quarter? He tapped the paper once, firm. It ends. Today. The room erupted in gasps. The manager's smirk shattered. Color drained from her face as her eyes scanned the document. Legal letterhead. Signatures. A weight of authority, undeniable. The father blinked, stunned, torn between disbelief and pride. The gray-suited customer's watch hand froze mid-adjustment. He swallowed hard, suddenly silent. The junior teller's eyes widened. She whispered, almost involuntarily, I knew I saw his name in the system. Her voice carried farther than she intended. Murmurs surged in response. The teenager's phone shook slightly, but the recording was steady. He owns the bank, she breathed into her mic. The son's gaze never left the manager's. His words came crisp, final. You didn't just insult a client. You humiliated my father in the lobby of a bank I own. And that deal, your lifeline, your future shatters here with your words still echoing. The marble floor seemed to hum with the weight of it. Witnesses whispered. Security froze. unsure whether to advance or retreat. The balance of power had flipped in seconds, and the manager stood on the wrong side of it. For the first time since the ID hit the floor, the father's shoulders lifted. His shame was no longer his to carry. The son's final words cut through the air, sharp as steel. "You thought my silence meant weakness, it meant patience, and now your time is over." The lobby cracked open with panic. The manager staggered back from the counter, eyes darting between the folder and the crowd of phones, capturing her every expression. Her voice, once sharp and commanding, faltered. This can't be real. But even she didn't sound convinced. The gray-suited customer, who had mocked earlier, shifted uneasily in his chair. He tugged at his cufflinks, suddenly sweating under the weight of his own silence. His smirk had vanished, replaced by the haunted look of a man realizing he had sided with the wrong history. The two security guards froze mid-step. One whispered to the other, "Did he say owner?" The second shook his head in disbelief, eyes flicking between the document and the steady camera lights blinking across the lobby. Neither moved closer, neither dared. The junior teller's voice finally broke free. "He's telling the truth," she said, louder this time, forcing the words past fear. "I saw his name in the system this morning. Carter, executive clearance. It's there." Her confession rang like a bell in the silence. Witnesses leaned in, whispering, repeating the word Carter as if it were both revelation and indictment. The teenager's live stream comments exploded in real time. "This is insane. She just humiliated the owner of the bank. Justice is happening live." "Oh." The manager's assistant, pale and trembling, stammered, "Ma'am, if he's the principal stakeholder." His words collapsed under the weight of implication. The manager snapped, desperate to regain control. "Shut up, all of you!" Her voice cracked, no longer an order but a plea. But the lobby wasn't hers anymore. A woman in the waiting line stood, arms folded. "I saw you throw his ID. You laughed. You called him a fraud." Her voice carried firm, steady. Another customer joined in. "You said he was violent. We all heard it." The weight of witnesses pressed in from every angle. Phones hovered like floodlights. Truth replayed in real time. The father stood a little taller, the card secure in his grip. His humiliation was no longer his. The burden had shifted back onto those who had tried to bury him under it. The manager's hands trembled as she tried to straighten papers that didn't need straightening. Her lips parted, desperate for a lie that could erase the truth printed on legal letterhead and broadcast across live streams. But lies die quickly in the face of evidence. The son remained steady, silent again now, letting the chaos fold inward on those who had caused it. His calm was more terrifying than rage. The gray-suited customer whispered, almost to himself, "He really owns it." His voice carried, small but undeniable. And just like that, the room turned. The manager wasn't the authority anymore. She was the accused. The silence didn't last long. The son picked up his phone from the counter again, pressing one button. His voice was calm, almost surgical. "Terminate the branch manager, effective immediately. Lock her out of the system. Freeze her credentials." On the other end, the assistant's voice replied, crisp and unshaken. "Confirmed. Access revoked. Audit log updated." The manager blinked, confusion breaking into panic as her tablet beeped in her hands. The screen flickered red. "Access denied." She tapped again, frantic, but the message repeated, her face drained of color. No, this is a mistake," she stammered, pressing button after button, but every click was another nail in the coffin of her authority. The junior teller watched in stunned silence, her mouth falling open. She whispered to no one in particular, "It's real. He can do that." "Oh." The witnesses gasped as the manager's badge, clipped neatly to her blazer, buzzed once, then twice. A small red light blinked across its surface. "Disabled." The son didn't flinch. He turned slightly, his words cutting through the panic. "Audit every transaction she touched in the last 12 months. Forward discrepancies to legal." "Yes, sir," came the immediate reply through the speaker. The gray-suited customer sank lower in his chair, trying to vanish into the fabric, the earlier arrogance stripped bare. The two security guards exchanged looks. Realizing they were no longer following her orders, they were standing in front of the man who signed their paychecks. Both stepped back without a word. The father stared at his son, disbelief and pride colliding in his eyes, his ID still clutched in his hand. now no longer a symbol of humiliation but of vindication. The manager, breathing fast, reached for her assistant. "Do something. Tell him he can't." The assistant shook his head slowly, voice cracking. "He can." And then the final blow came. The son's gaze swept the room, calm but resolute. "The $5 billion deal we were about to finalize is canceled. Effective immediately. Draft the termination notice. Notify the board. This branch will be under direct review until further notice." Gasps cascaded through the lobby. Customers covered their mouths. Phones tilted higher. The live stream's comment section erupted in disbelief. The manager stumbled backward, her words incoherent, her authority dissolved. She wasn't the executioner anymore. She was the executed. The son let the silence linger, heavy and undeniable. He didn't raise his voice, didn't need to. Every action had spoken louder than rage ever could. For the first time, the room wasn't looking at the manager. It wasn't even looking at the father. Every eye was on him, the black CEO, and justice was no longer pending, it had been delivered. The lobby was silent, not the kind of silence that comes from emptiness, but the kind that follows a verdict. The manager stood frozen, her badge dead, her tablet lifeless in her hands. Around her, the very staff who had once laughed now looked away, ashamed, afraid. The gray-suited customer who had mocked earlier avoided every gaze, shrinking into the corner as if the marble floor itself might swallow him whole. But in the center of it all stood the son, no longer anonymous, no longer ignored. He didn't raise his arms in triumph, didn't smile in victory. He simply stood, calm, unshaken, the weight of authority settling over the room like a shadow. Then, slowly, he bent down. The old man's hands were still trembling, the ID clutched like fragile glass. But his son took it gently, as if it were priceless, and lifted it high enough for everyone to see. The card no longer looked like a piece of plastic. It looked like a mirror reflecting back every prejudice, every sneer, every careless word spoken in this room. He turned to his father, voice low but resonant. "They tried to put you on the floor, but remember." He pressed the card back into his father's hand, curling his fingers around it with quiet strength. "We're the ones who built the floor they're standing on." The words cut through the lobby sharper than any shout. The teenager behind the phone gasped, whispering into her stream. "That's the line. That's the moment." The comments exploded. "Chills. This is history. From humiliation to justice in minutes." The father's shoulders rose, his spine straightening as if decades of burden had finally been lifted. His shame had been erased, not by anger, not by pleading, but by truth wielded like a blade. The junior teller, eyes shining, whispered into the heavy air, "I won't forget this." "Oh." The security guards stepped back further, their radios silent now. Even they knew the ground had shifted. The son turned once more to the crowd, not to gloat, not to threaten, but to close. His voice was steady, final. Dignity doesn't need permission. Respect isn't negotiable. And justice doesn't wait. The words lingered like a closing gavel. The father slipped the ID back into his wallet, no longer trembling. For the first time that morning, he smiled a small, quiet smile. But enough. The two men turned toward the glass doors, walking out not as victims but as victors, leaving behind a lobby forever marked by what had just unfolded. No applause followed. None was needed. The silence itself was enough. Because everyone there knew one truth. They had witnessed a reckoning. And for those who thought silence was weakness, they had just learned it was the sharpest weapon of all.